Hello, students. I'm Matthew Wilson, and I will be your economics professor for this semester. So today is the first day of class. We'll spend some time looking at course policies, and then we'll get started on the main material. Because this is a very unusual semester and online class, we'll probably take a bit more time talking about course policy than I would normally, but there's still going to be some space for the main material to get started. So mostly what I'll do is I'll be uploading videos in advance. You can then watch them on your own time. There'll be some incentives in place to make sure you do watch them on time and don't fall too far behind. So with that little introduction out of the way, we'll go and turn over to the slides.
The class is Principles of Microeconomics. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself and some of my work before we go into the details of the course. So I grew up in Washington State, spent 5 years in Oregon for grad school. After that, I spent 4 years in Missouri teaching at Truman State, and this is my second year at Binghamton. So my research focuses on self-fulfilling prophecies and the money supply. I like to tell this story with a solar eclipse analogy. We had this really exciting time in Truman State, Missouri, where we had an actual solar eclipse on the first day of class when I was going to bring out my solar eclipse analogy. Unfortunately, though, as you can see from the picture here, we had a thunderstorm at the same time as the solar eclipse. As a result, you couldn't really tell is it dark because of the thunderstorm or dark because of the eclipse. So a bit of a letdown. The t-shirt, though, shows you what a solar eclipse should look like if the sun were out. So the moon blocks the sun for a couple minutes, so you get nighttime in the middle of the day. So in the analogy, you can imagine some ancient village, and in ancient times they often attached great significance to the events in the sky. So they're used to daytime during the daytime and night during night. So if they suddenly saw this happen, the moon blocking the sun, and we have night in the middle of the day, they could be very alarmed. And they could believe that there might be some special sign or significance to this event. Maybe they go to their wise men, their elders, and ask them, what does this mean for our village? And they go and consult among themselves, and the wise men and elders come back and say, this is a sign of coming disaster to our village. How might people react to that? Maybe they'll start saving more and spending less. If you save more money, that way if some catastrophe strikes, and the wise men said catastrophe will strike, so you want to be ready. If you save more, then you can live off your savings in case you lose your job during this disaster. But if everyone's saving more at the same time and no one's buying stuff, then people lose their jobs, and people lose their jobs, we get a recession, and I guess those wise men are right. We did indeed get a catastrophe after the solar eclipse. But nowadays, of course, we're more enlightened. We know that solar eclipses don't actually cause disasters. This is a complicated world, though, so there are still a lot of things that we don't fully understand. So maybe when something happens with the Federal Reserve tinkering with monetary policy, we're not sure what that means, so we go and we consult with our wise men, elders, or we're supposed to call them economists now. We ask our economists, what does it mean? Our economists might say, the economy is going to be doing well, or the economists might say, this policy is going to lead to a disaster. And maybe those predictions could also be self-fulfilling prophecies in much the same way they were for the ancient village. So that's one of my papers that I've been working on. I got published about a year ago, so I could talk a lot more about research if you wanted me to, but I suspect you came here to learn about principles of micro, so I guess we should transition to talking about that. Alright, so there are two branches in economics. There's macro and there's micro. So macro is about the entire nation's economy. So things like how does the Federal Reserve adjusting the money supply affect recessions, like I was talking about earlier? Well, that's about the whole nation's economy. That's in the realm of macroeconomics. This class is about micro. Micro is about households and firms and industries. It's a much smaller scale. Here's how I can avoid mixing them up. If you want to look at something small, you might use a microscope. So micro has to be the small one. That means macro has to be the big one. The other part of our course title is that it's Principles of Microeconomics. We use that to mean we're going to focus on a lot of the basics here. So in the next several weeks, you'll see many points in the videos where I'll say, I could prove this, but this would be more advanced, and we'll do that in intermediate micro instead. So a lot of the more advanced stuff gets saved for later on. So here's a table from your textbook clarifying the distinction between macro and micro. There could be some confusion because they often care about a lot of the same things. So both macroeconomists and microeconomists care about income. To a microeconomist, income is referring to a household's income or a worker's income or a firm's income. A firm's income is called the firm's revenue. When a macroeconomist talks about income, they're talking about income for the entire country. If a microeconomist is talking about output, they're talking about how much a worker produces or how much a firm produces. A macroeconomist cares about the output for an entire country. A microeconomist might care about one worker's employment. A macroeconomist cares about the unemployment rate in the entire country. A microeconomist cares about the price of a single good. Macroeconomists care about the overall price level in the whole country. They also care about how that price level is changing over time. That's the inflation rate. So the main thing to keep in mind is that micro is small scale, macro is large scale. And we're in micro here, so we're going to look at the small stuff. So now that you know what microeconomics is basically about, let's go talk about course policies. So my office hours will be in Zoom because of the pandemic, so I'll be there at 8 p.m. to 9, that's Eastern time, and that'll be on Wednesday night. So on the My Courses page, you'll see a Zoom link they can join during those hours. You don't need an appointment or anything, just show up during those times and we can go talk about econ. Now, email policy, this is very important. So these principles classes are gigantic. There's a couple hundred of you guys, but there's only one of me. That means that if everyone emails me, I'm going to get overwhelmed and I won't be able to answer all those emails or take care of my other responsibilities on top of those. So to split up the labor, you guys have to email your TAs first. So if there are 4 TAs, to divide up all the email burden, then we should be able to keep that under control. If your TA is stumped by the question, it gets a question they just can't answer, they can forward it to me so we can have contact that way. But the TA is always going to be your first resource when you're sending an email. So depending upon which section you're in, here is your TA and their contact information. They also have their own My Courses page for the discussion section, and you'll see announcements that they're posting there. So the main class is going to be asynchronous for the most part, with a few exceptions like exams. The TAs have discretion over whether they want to make discussion sections synchronous or asynchronous. They'll post an announcement about that on My Courses when they've made their decision. So because this class is, the main class is asynchronous, there's no Zoom link for the class, it's only a Zoom link for office hours. So here's how your grade is broken down. So most of it comes down to exams. There are 2 midterms and a final. Each of those exams is worth 30% of your grade. So here are the dates of the exams. We don't yet know the date of the final exam. We have not been assigned a time by the university. When I do learn that, I'll post an announcement and let you guys know. It's very important that you don't make any travel plans until after you know your final exam schedule. The department has a very firm policy about not giving makeup exams because you wanted to leave early. So get the exam dates first before you make any plans. Otherwise, you could get a 0 on an exam. You don't want that. The other 10% of your grade comes from my course's online homework. So there's going to be 10 of those throughout the semester. First one's going to be in about 2 weeks. They'll typically be due on Sunday nights, and there's a reason for that. I very much want to encourage you guys to start your homework early, and there'll be some more discussion of that shortly. And this is part of the incentives to push you guys to do that. So if you do your homework early and finish up on, say, Friday, you have to enjoy the rest of your weekend. If you want to put things off until the last minute, then you don't get a full weekend. So that's an incentive to start your homework early so you can get things done on time and not have anything come up. There's also some extra credit for complying with syllabus policies. So in particular, that means the email policy, always email your TA first. If I get an email from you, then there goes your extra credit. So just follow the rules, you get a free point. So I do recognize that emergencies do happen. I have had students who have gotten COVID in the past, or I have had students who've needed heart surgery unexpectedly. So things do come up, and because of that, I do drop your lowest homework. So that's the way we accommodate emergencies. Lowest homework gets dropped. Because of that accommodation, there's going to be no late homework, and there's going to be no extensions. And those are all very, very firm policies. So because of that, you should start your homework early, like I said before. So if the homework's due at 11 p.m. and you start at 10:48 and your Wi-Fi goes down for a few minutes, that could mean you missed a homework assignment. You only get to drop your lowest assignment. So make sure you set that for a real emergency and not something silly like I started homework too late and my Wi-Fi went down. So if you start your homework in advance, like you start, say, on Thursday and your Wi-Fi goes down for a few minutes, then you still have tons and tons of time before the actual deadline on Sunday, so things like that aren't going to bother you. Or if you start your homework well in advance and you have a lot of other assignments in your other classes, you can still finish it in time before a deadline and get credit for it. So be careful with that lowest homework because you want to save that for a real crisis and not for something silly like you forgot or you got stressed or something. So one thing I noticed when I went online because I was forced to during the pandemic in March 2020, starting there, is that students would wait until the day before the exam before they started watching the videos, and they fall way far behind during the rest of the term. This is a graph of the viewing stats for the videos. You can see midterm 2 and see the final very clearly. We already had midterm 1 before the whole shutdown thing happened, so that's not on this graph. So what I don't like about cramming is that it's bad for long-term retention. So there are some incentives in place to make sure you guys don't cram. So one that's going to be is that you're going to need a password in order to open the homework assignments. So that password is going to be in the bottom of the screen around hereabouts for maybe 10-15 seconds. It's going to be in one of the videos. And I'm not going to specify which one. You just got to watch them all and pay attention and you'll see it there. So because you need to get the password to do the homework and you have homework due about once a week, that's going to prevent you from doing stuff like this where you only watch the videos on the day before the exam. So there are some benefits to the asynchronous approach. So one benefit is that if you don't quite get something the first time you hear it, you can always just pause the video and go back. For that reason, I tend to go a little bit faster in the videos than I would go if it were a face-to-face lecture. That's because if you can understand material quickly, you just keep going. If you're someone who needs a bit more time to process it, you can always just pause and go back, and there's no harm to a little bit faster pace. It also means things like if you're taking notes, you don't have to worry about falling behind like you would in lecture. Like if you're writing something down, it could be 2 slides in the future, and you could miss something important. If it's a video, though, you can always just pause the video while you're writing things down, and that way you don't miss anything. So because of that faster pace in the videos, you might find that I might schedule, like we're going to watch this video, that video, that video for this week, and it might add up to less than 3 hours of content. That's because I'm expecting you guys to pause the video at certain points to take notes or something. Or even just take a break. If you just want to go to the bathroom or something during class or during the video, just pause it and you're fine. You're not going to miss anything like you would in a regular lecture. There are also many invitations where I try and get some interaction, you might say, though it's hard to do so with an online class. So you might see points in the video where I'll put a problem in the slide and invite you guys to pause the video and try to work through it on your own and get the answer before we go over the result in the video. So that'd be a certain set of videos per week, but it might be less than 3 hours of watch time, even though I'm probably spending 3 hours when you're actually doing it because of all the pausing and stuff like that. So that's how the homework works. Here's how the exams work. So the exams are going to be all through my courses, and they're multiple choice. So one big concern in any online class is, how do I stop students from cheating? So there are several tools in place that will make cheating probably backfire, so you'll want to be honest on your own. So here are the measures we have in place to deter cheating. So first of all, I have a large pool of potential questions, like 70 to 100 or so, and your exam is going to be randomly drawn from that pool of questions. How does that deter cheating? Well, if you're trying to work with your friend together, your friend's test is going to look different because questions are randomly drawn. So you're trying to work together, but you have different tests. There's no benefit from copying off each other. If they say, I chose choice C for question 1, but their question 1's different from your question 1, you probably don't want to just put down C on your test. There's also no backtracking on exams. So one concern is that you could just flip through the questions on the exam and see, where do my exam questions overlap with my friend's exam's questions. Well, if you can't backtrack, if you can't go back to a previous question, then you can't compare. So it means that when you finish question 3, submit your answer, move on to question 4, you can't go back and change question 3. That one's set. So that's another way to discourage trying to work together. Exams are asynchronous, so you can't take the exam first and then tell your friend some tips for it. So that's another way to try to deter cheating. It is open book, open note, because I can't police you guys and make sure you're not consulting books or notes. I do, however, have incentive to make sure that the knowledge is in your head rather than on paper. That's a time limit. So if you're going back to your book and notes for every question, you're probably going to run out of time. So it's better to really just know the material in your head instead, even though I can't stop you from checking books and notes. I'm not going to try to stop you from checking books and notes. Just have that incentive there to make sure you know the material so you can manage your time properly. So again, I recognize that crises do happen. People do get COVID the day before the exam, so we can try to schedule a makeup exam. Over my career, I've almost always been able to make it work. I had like 1 or 2 exceptions where I've not been able to accommodate someone, but generally I can make it work. We can find some time after you recover to take your exam. I do require proof though. So if you get the coronavirus, I want to see a positive test result before I reschedule your exam. Something like that to prove this is a real crisis, not something you just made up in order to get more time. So here's a link to the Restarting Binghamton University. This is mostly for the face-to-face classes, so not really relevant for us, but this could be of interest for those of you who do have some face-to-face classes. I recognize that not everyone's taking this class in Binghamton. You might be in some foreign country. The videos are on some of our course tools are on websites that might be censored in foreign countries. The way to get around that is to use a virtual private network. So here's the link to Binghamton's VPN, so you can use that and log in through there and access all the materials. So there are several tools in place to help you get ready for the exams. So I post practice problems on my courses. I think those are actually already up there. So you can work through those. Your TAs will go over the homework answers in the discussion sections. Make sure you can still solve all of your old homework problems before the exams because we do put a lot of focus on problem solving in economics. So compared to most other classes, you might see more emphasis on solving problems and maybe a bit less emphasis on knowing definitions. Still got to know definitions, of course, but it gets less weight than problem solving here. So make sure you work through your old homework problems. Make sure you can work through the practice problems. There's also the practice session. That's going to be like a practice exam. So on the class period before the midterms and the final, we'll have the practice session will be synchronous, just like the exam. We're trying to replicate exam conditions. So it'll be a set of problems you work on for maybe 20 minutes or so, or 30 minutes. And then there'll be a video where we go over the answers to those. So we get a taste for what the exam is like. I'm not going to copy the exact same questions from the practice session to the midterm because you've already seen the answers to those. But it does give you an idea of the flavor of the exam. Let's also be upfront about a few things. You're not in high school anymore, and high school is pretty grade inflated compared to college. You probably got some easy A's in high school, but that's not going to be the case here at Binghamton in the econ program. So you want to keep your straight A GPA. That's going to require a lot more work than it did back in the high school days. So just want to give you a heads up about that. So here's an outline of all the chapters we'll be covering in this semester. We'll first go over some economic basics. These ideas, the 5 foundations of economics and trade, are applicable to both macro and to micro. Now, your book calls them the 5 foundations. Other books might have different terms, but the same ideas will be seen just about in every econ course. Now, here I take a bit of a detour compared to most other principles of micro professors. Usually go into supply and demand, chapter 3, because that comes after chapter 2. I go through consumer choice first, and there's a reason for that. So part of the market is the demand side, which comes from consumers, what they want to buy and what they're willing to pay for goods. But I want to go through consumer choice first to see where does demand come from. Look at the foundations of that, which come from consumer preferences. So with those foundations in place, only then do we go on to looking at supply and demand. Then we move into what's called elasticity. That looks at, you might say, how sensitive the market is to changes in different conditions. Then we move on to look at several forms of government policy. So look at how do taxes affect markets? How do price controls like maximum prices and minimum prices, called price floors and ceilings, how do those affect markets? When is the market inefficient, and what kinds of policies can fix those inefficiencies? That's chapter 7. So then we move on to look at the supply side, look at the view from the firm's perspective. Now, there's a lot of different chapters for that because there are four kinds of what we call market structures. So, at one extreme we have what's called perfect competition. We have lots and lots of small firms, and no single firm can affect the overall market price. That's one extreme. The other extreme is there's one single firm monopoly who controls the entire market. And there are also some cases in between those two extremes. So we spend a separate chapter on each of those four market structures. We also look at costs, and we look at something called price discrimination, where different groups of consumers might face different prices. We wrap up by looking at a couple of selected topics. We look at resources. So, as one example, on the market for land is a bit different from most other markets. That's because it's a fixed supply of land. You can't go to the store and buy more land. Your factory can't produce more land. That's generally just going to be a constant. So that gets a separate chapter. We wrap up by looking at behavioral economics. So most of this course over here in the first part, we're at the standard view of microeconomics. There has been some emerging schools of thought, behavioral economics, which challenges some of those assumptions, and we'll look at the evidence for and against those theories. So that's our outline of course policies. I'll see you again next video, and we'll start learning about microeconomics.